All right, this could be huge. Everyone has been watching Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs dominate the headlines, but Solana, it is sneaking into the spotlight and fast. Odds are spiking. Polymarket is now pricing in a 70% chance that a Solana ETF goes live this month. And if that happens, we're not just looking at a price pump. We're looking at Solana's graduation into the big leagues of institutional crypto. Welcome back to another episode of JRNY TV, where we break down the real narratives that are moving across the markets. And today we are diving into the possibility of a Solana ETF becoming reality, what that means for the chain, and how it could completely flip the script on Sol, its ecosystem, and your entire altcoin strategy. We're going to talk about what Solana actually is, why ETF inflows are such a game changer, how Bitcoin and ETH set the playbook, and where analysts think Sol could go if the stars align. Let's start with the foundation. What exactly is Solana, and why should you be paying attention to Sol right now more than ever? What is Solana and why the Sol ecosystem matters more now than ever before? Let's break it down. Sol, or Solana, is a high-performance Layer 1 blockchain built for speed, scale, and accessibility. Unlike Ethereum, which relies heavily on rollups and Layer 2s to scale, Solana is built to do everything on-chain. It can process over 65,000 transactions per second. That's right, with fees that cost fractions of a penny. And that kind of throughput, it puts Solana in a league of its own. And it's one of the biggest reasons why it's become the go-to chain for both retail traders and serious builders alike. But Solana isn't just fast, it is sticky as hell. The user experience is smooth, mobile native integrations are growing fast, and the wallet game? Shout out to Phantom. It's miles ahead of most competitors. That is a huge deal in a space where onboarding is everything. And this usability is a big reason why Solana's ecosystem has exploded, from DeFi to NFTs to meme coins and beyond. Speaking of which, memes, let's talk about Bonk. It started off as a joke, but quickly became one of the top performing tokens on Solana. Now it's practically the face of Solana's community coin culture. Projects like Fartcoin, Pump, and more are pulling insane volume and keeping the chain alive with energy. But beyond the memes, Solana is also pushing innovation. DePIN, known as decentralized physical infrastructure, Solana Pay, token extensions, and mobile forward initiatives are turning it into a full stack ecosystem. But why does this matter? Because if a Solana ETF gets approved, the floodgates open, not just for Sol the asset, but for every coin, protocol, and platform that is building on it. When big money comes in, ecosystem tokens pump right alongside the main chain. That's what we saw with Ethereum. That's what we'll see again. Solana is no longer just the fast chain with memes. It's becoming the most complete chain for retail, builders, and maybe now institutions. And the ETF narrative, it could finally be the rocket fuel that finally takes it mainstream. What is an ETF and why a Solana ETF would be a massive deal for crypto investors? All right, so let's zoom out real quick. What exactly is an ETF? It stands for Exchange Traded Fund, and it's basically a way to let investors buy into an asset like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or potentially Solana without needing to actually own or manage crypto itself. Think of it like a stock that you can trade in a traditional brokerage account, but it tracks the value of a crypto asset. Now, here's why it matters. An ETF is a gateway for institutional capital, retirement funds, and family offices, even hedge funds and average retail investors who use platforms like Fidelity or Schwab. They can't just go spin up a Phantom wallet and start farming yield. They need regulated products and ETFs that give them that access. That's what made the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs such a massive deal. And it's exactly why a Solana ETF would be a game changer. When the Bitcoin ETFs launched in January, we saw billions of dollars flood in from traditional finance. Ethereum's ETF approval followed, and even though Ethereum had been lagging, institutional flows helped it break through $3,700 again. The key here is ease of access. Once an ETF goes live, anyone can get exposure to Sol with a click. 401k accounts, financial advisors, institutions, it all opens up. And let's be real, Solana is not some fringe token anymore. It's a top 6 asset by market cap, powering one of the most active chains in all of crypto. Giving investors an ETF means giving Solana a seat at the table next to Bitcoin and Ethereum. A Solana ETF would validate the chain in the eyes of traditional markets. It would unlock billions in capital, and most importantly, it would pour gasoline on everything building in the Solana ecosystem. Is the Solana ETF actually happening? Polymarket odds say yes. Here's where things get really interesting. According to Polymarket, the decentralized prediction market where people bet real money on real-world outcomes, the odds of a Solana ETF being approved this month have jumped to nearly 70%. And that's not hopium. That's based on actual capital being stacked on the belief that it's happening right now. And in crypto, where narrative timing is everything, that kind of probability sends a serious signal through the market. So what's fueling this speculation? Well, for starters, the success of the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, it has opened up the floodgates. The SEC has now shown it is very willing to approve spot crypto ETFs under the right conditions. And with Sol cementing itself as the third most important asset in this space by user activity, developer growth, and sheer narrative strength, it's the next logical step. Add to that the fact that the major ETF issuers like VanEck and Franklin Templeton have publicly praised Solana's tech, and suddenly the idea does not sound so far-fetched. If the announcement hits this month, we're not just looking at a narrative breakout. We're talking about a massive inflow of capital from institutions, pension funds, and retail brokers who have been waiting on the sidelines for a regulated way to gain exposure. But it's not just the financial impact. A Solana ETF would be a cultural moment. It would prove that what started out as a high-speed ETH killer is now recognized by Wall Street as part of the core crypto stack. It would validate the builders, the traders, the communities, the bondholders included, and trigger a ripple effect across every major Solana ecosystem token. Socially, it would be everywhere. Mainstream headlines, CNBC, Bloomberg, maybe even TikTok. Financially, billions in new exposure and price momentum that we have not seen since 2021. If Polymarket's right and this ETF gets the green light, Solana won't just be catching up to Ethereum and Bitcoin. It'll be officially playing in the same league. Solana price predictions. How high could Sol go if the ETF gets approved? So let's talk the numbers, because if this ETF hits, we're not just looking at a short-term pump. We're talking about a potential repricing of Solana entirely. Right now, Sol is hovering around the $160 mark, still well below its all-time high of $260. But if the ETF gets approved and institutional money starts flowing in, that ceiling gets blown wide open. Multiple analysts are now revising their 2025 Solana outlook. Standard Chartered, which already made headlines with aggressive Ethereum predictions, is now hitting at $350 to $500 for Sol in a base case ETF scenario. Some crypto native funds are even throwing out targets of $750 or more if Solana captures the kind of sustained inflows Bitcoin and Ethereum saw after their ETFs were launched. And don't forget, these two already brought in billions within weeks. A Solana ETF doesn't just bring capital, it brings trust. It brings pension funds, hedge funds, and retail advisors suddenly see Sol not as a risk-on asset, but as a legit asset class. And that shift in perception is where the real gains come from. When you move from speculative token to institutional grade product, the market treats you quite differently. Price discovery goes vertical. And beyond Sol itself, the entire ecosystem benefits. Bonk, Jupe, Fartcoin, Render, and every serious Solana project sees increased liquidity, higher valuations, and a lot more demand. And that's what makes this ETF moment so massive. It's not just bullish for the token, it's bullish for the chain. If the ETF is approved this month, $200 to $250 could come fast. And then from there, $500 plus isn't a meme, it's a roadmap. Solana's ETF era might be just days away. We have seen it play out before. Bitcoin got its ETF, Ethereum followed, and both times the floodgates opened. Billions poured in, prices surged, and the markets shifted overnight. Now Solana might be the next in line. The infrastructure is there, ecosystem is booming, and if Polymarket's 70% odds are right, we could be just days away from a decision that changes everything in crypto. This isn't just a price event, it is a credibility event. A Solana ETF would officially put Sol in the same class as Bitcoin and Ethereum. It would give the entire ecosystem a spotlight on the golden stage. It would also drive new adoption, new narratives, and new capital into one of the most explosive chains in crypto today. So whether you're already holding Sol or you're just watching from the sidelines, the window of early is closing fast. The next few weeks could shape the next few years. And if Solana makes the leap into the ETF spotlight, it won't be a quiet move. It'll be a market-wide shift. This is JRNY TV. Please be sure to stay alert, stay ahead, and keep it locked right here on JRNY TV. We'll be watching the charts, the news, and the odds as Solana's biggest moment yet continues to unfold. We will catch you in the next one.